Everybody, thank you so much for showing up today. This is a beautiful opportunity to welcome not only one, but two guests into the walled garden here. And I'll just do a brief introduction of both. Uh, I probably don't really need to say much about William Stevens here, Professor William Stevens, because he's been on the show a few times. And I will actually say that, man, some of my favorite conversations, especially the last one that we had on the walled garden, have been with William, and I've been honored to have him on the show. He is a philosopher and has spent his life in academia as well. Author of multiple books, including a couple that I have here, which I was very excited to get. Marcus Aurelius, A Guide for the Perplexed. Right, there we go. And also Stoic Ethics. There we go. Epictetus and Happiness as Freedom. So this one here. And William has just a phenomenal understanding of the Stoic philosophy slash theology. And if anybody wants to get a deeper understanding of that and get to know his thinking a little bit more on that matter, definitely dive into the previous conversation that we had. Now, when it comes to Nick, man, I got to know this young man. He's only a few years younger than me, but I guess still get to say that. But I got to know Nick a few months back. We started talking, and it's just been such an honor to get to know him. He's a very talented young coach, athletics, sports coach. And at the moment, coaching football, right? Soccer?
Soccer, yeah.
Soccer, that's right.
Football
Okay.
for the European out there.
That's
Yeah.
right. And
Yep.
and so in our time together, we've spent a lot of time discussing this kind of metaphor of virtue as it relates to the football team. And I really do think that if anybody after this episode wants to go back and listen to that previous conversation that I had with William, uh, it I think it's actually an appropriate place to start for today because uh, last time we were discussing this idea found in Stoicism that there is this kind of totality, the wholeness, the oneness of which we're all a part of. In our last soul searching with Seneca, we called it the big soup. we're all swimming around in this cosmic soup, and then outside of the oneness or within the oneness, there is a fragmentation. There is a part to whole relationship with everything. And with my conversations with Nick, man, we had so much, it was so meaningful to discuss this idea that in a sports team, it's such a perfect picture of this very idea because you have the totality, you have the wholeness of the team, but then even larger than that, you've got both teams, and then you've got the game, and then it just to the audience, all this sort of stuff. But then you've got the parts. What is each person doing within that team? And how do they relate to the whole? And so I don't know, maybe I'm going to stop talking for a moment and say, Nick, would you like to start and just introduce yourself a little bit more? And then William do the same. And then we'll just see where we go with this conversation. And maybe at around, maybe in 45 minutes or so, we'll open it up to a bit of a Q&A and see if we can open up the conversation. So Nick, take it away, mate.
Yeah, thanks for that intro. Yeah, I think I'm really excited to have William on because when I wrote my undergraduate dissertation on Stoicism and sports coaching. And one of the best articles I read, and like it was the only article I printed out and highlighted, annotated, was an article written by William and one of his colleagues at Creighton, called "The Stoic Can a Cubs Fan Be a Stoic Sportsman?" Or how can a Cubs fan really truly be a Stoic? And it's just a fantastic piece. It was super interesting to me. And so I'm just excited to have him on the show. But I wrote I really got into Stoicism, writing about sports coaching and how Stoicism can relate to coaching. But there's three parts in sports in terms of looking at it philosophically. You have the fan, you have the coaches, and you have the players. So how do each of those, like Simon says, contribute to that soup? How can those pieces act virtuously in the sporting sense, and what does that look like? So William, I'll hand it over to you. That's kind of what I'm looking for today.
Thank you, Nick. You're very kind, Simon. You're much too kind and generous. Really delighted to be talking with all of you today. It's a great opportunity for me. It's a lot of fun. So my thanks to all of you. Um, yeah, as somebody growing up in Indiana, in the heartland of basketball mania, I've been drawn to sports since I was a kid, like many of us have. Um, I wanted to be good at basketball. I was good at tennis. And I quickly, after one day on the football practice field, I realized very quickly that was not the sport for me. Um, but reflecting on sport and then learning Stoicism, I was delighted to learn that Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius and Seneca as well use these different sport analogies often. So for today's talk, maybe it'll help at least me organize my thoughts to think about the two different dimensions of the relationship between Stoicism and Stoic virtue and sports. So one of them is moving from Stoicism to sport. In other words, how does someone who is drawn to Stoicism and trying to apply Stoic ideas to her daily living, how does that Stoic in training approach sports, think about sports, engage in sports, and evaluate sports? And then the relationship goes the other way, right? So, what kind of sport imagery, analogy, similes do we find in ancient Stoic writings that are taken from sport? And how do these sport examples or sport analogies inform Stoic living? Because they do, and they're very popular in Epictetus. But Marcus also talks about wrestling, right? Epictetus and Marcus talk about how one way to think about your relationship in the world from part to whole, as you were saying, Simon, with this kind of mereology, the relationship between parts and wholes, is that God or nature, the world, has assigned to you a very tough, young, strong wrestler. And so challenges that you have in life, so-called adversities, are opportunities for you to become a better wrestler. How do you wrestle with problems? How do you wrestle with challenges in the right sort of way, right? And it's significant that they don't use, in this context, martial language. That is, it's not a military sort of thing. When you face adversities, you're not squared off against an enemy, right? And so on the sporting field, on the basketball court or the football field, the soccer field, whatever, tennis court, you're not facing an enemy. It's not combat. It's a wrestling partner who's challenging you to develop your own skills, right? To get better as a wrestler, right? Which is why, at the end of these sporting events, if you've done them right, you congratulate your opponents. You have respect for your opponents. And the Stoics are projecting this to our relationship to the world, right? Bad things, what makes them bad is your judgment that they're bad. So to see them not as tragedies or hardships, but as opportunities or challenges to improve your skill at coping, at wrestling, to become a better wrestler. Well, that's how you practice to get better. If you want to be a better wrestler, you don't wrestle with someone half your weight who's not as good as you are, right? You wrestle against, you want as a wrestling partner somebody who's a little better than you are, a little stronger than you are, so you can hone your skills. So that's one of the many kind of Stoic analogies they use. So which, Simon, did you want to, do we want to focus on moving from sport analogies to Stoicism, or how Stoics approach sport? Because we can we can do both. But
I mean, where would you like to start? I'm happy to keep on going along either way, wherever you think is most appropriate.
well, I mean, one thing I could throw out is approaching things from how a Stoic approaches sport. And Nick,
Mm.
definitely want your perspective on this. But one text we have in Marcus's Meditations is, he chides himself for caring about whether one chariot team wins or another. He says it doesn't matter whether it's the blues or the greens that win the chariot race. And what that means, and Epictetus has similar ideas that similar texts in which he says, if you're rooting for someone who's performing, I think his example is a singer, but it holds for sports too. If you're rooting for one team and you identify with that team as a fan, right? I'm a Chicago Cubs fan, right? If I get upset or sad or even disappointed when the Cubs lose, then I'm a fool, right? It means I'm totally clueless. Why? Because, as we all know, it's only a game. And what does that mean? It means the outcome of the game doesn't matter at all. It's utterly trivial. In the context of life, what matters is virtue and doing everything you can to live a virtuous life and avoiding vice and evil in your actions and thoughts and intentions at all costs. Everything else doesn't matter, right? It's indifferent. And so whenever you see someone like, so here we are in January, right? So in another couple of months in March, it'll be March Madness and NCAA college basketball. And what are you going to see when these games end and they the television image pans to the crowd and goes up close to the students, right? To my old Creighton students. If Creighton gets eliminated in the tournament and they zoom in on the cheerleaders, and this is not to pick on the cheerleaders, but what are you gonna see? You're gonna see fans weeping because their team lost a basketball game. From a Stoic perspective, this is lunacy. This is not a tragedy. It's not even bad. Now, that takes you aback because you think, well, but wait, then what does Stoicism have to do with sports if the Stoics hold that the outcome of any sporting event, any kind of contest like that, any sort of game, is utterly trivial and unimportant? What can Stoicism have to say in a positive way about sport? Well, quite a lot, right? Because although the outcome of the contest doesn't matter at all, what you do to get ready for it in your role, as Nick said, either as a coach or as a player or as a trainer, right? Or as a fan, how you conduct yourself during the game matters a lot. It matters a lot. Are you treating your opponents with respect? Are you trying to cheat? Are you whining and complaining and bellyaching to the referees? Any sort of complaint to the referees, any sort of criticism of your teammates or your coach or your assistant coach, any sort of trash talking on the court, all of these are rejected as beyond the pale by a Stoic. Your job, if you're a player, is to prepare for the contest the best you can, focus on what's up to you during the game, and be the best player you can be on the court or on the field. Be a good teammate, listen to your coach, and work on your virtuosic skills of being a great ball player or a great tennis player, right? Once you hit the tennis ball, once you shoot the basketball, once you kick the soccer ball, it's beyond your control what your teammates do, what the fans do. If they're throwing garbage in from the stands, that's beyond your control. How are you going to deal with it? Answer, you got to deal with it virtuously. Focus on what's up to you, right?
Mm.
So Stoicism really has a lot to say about how to
Mm.
be a virtuous participant, fan, right? If you're a fan, what does Epictetus say? What does he say? Right? He says, if you're watching a contest, who should you root for? You should root for the team that does win to win, and then you won't be disappointed.
Hi friends, we'll be right back with this episode. But first, I wanted to let you know that most of the conversations that you hear on this show were recorded live at events and workshops in the Walled Garden Philosophical Society. We are so grateful for the quality of our guests and the kind of conversations that we get to have at these events, and we'd like to invite you to attend and join the conversation. Our events feature contributing philosophers of the Walled Garden, as well as world-class philosophers, theologians, artists, and spiritual leaders from all around the globe. If you'd like to come along, then just go to thewalledgarden.com/events. From there, you can find an event that you're interested in and register with a donation of your choosing. Or, if you're a subscribed caretaker in the Walled Garden, then you can get into all of these events for free by simply logging into the website and joining the Zoom waiting room via the event page. Again, go to thewalledgarden.com/events to register today. We look forward to seeing you there, but for now, enjoy the rest of this episode. Now I'm going to push back very slightly, and then I really want to bring Nick into this, right? Because Nick, I'd love for you to dive into kind of the conversations that we were having about just the layers upon layers upon layers within the kind of, maybe you've got the individual in the team who then corresponds to and participates in the team as a whole, and then you've got the coaches and the managers, and then you've got the audience. But even just the audience side of things, I think sometimes Stoicism, now when we're being very specific with the philosophy, it makes sense, logical sense. But I tell you, one of the first things that I did when I came over here to America is I went to a classic American baseball game. And oh my gosh, I'm sitting there in the stand. I bought myself the Anaheim Angels hat. I'm wearing it. I've got a Budweiser Freedom beer. I'm fully American, and I'm sitting up there in the stand and I'm loving this game. And, I'm rooting for the Angels. And there's something about it that is so beautiful to see. Just in the audience side of things. Sorry, my cat's been over here and there's hairs everywhere now. Okay. So just sitting in the audience and seeing, wow, look at all of these people who are just sitting here having a great day out, really enjoying this game, supporting their team. Everybody's getting drunk. It's there's a bit of madness. I swear to you, the 5 minutes that I walked out to get the cap is the 5 minutes when the entire team on the field had a big brawl, and it was even in all the newspapers and everything. I missed it, right? But to me, there's something about it makes logical sense that if you're sitting there as a Stoic, like Seneca, he said he'd go to the games not to watch what was happening in the center, but actually just to watch the people, right? So maybe if you're going there as a Stoic, you're thinking, great, I really want the best team to win, and that's appropriate. Nonetheless, I'm not so. I wouldn't say I'm cynical of the just getting into it, allowing yourself to have that output of I'm going to the game, I'm going to get into it, I'm going to support the team. And we've actually talked about this. I know, Nick, just this idea that even the fans have a responsibility or a part to play within the whole of what's happening in this arena at the moment. Maybe you could just speak a little bit to that kind of idea of like the whole and then the parts, especially as somebody who's coached teams.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think part of the joy of playing sports, especially at the professional level, and part of the reason a lot of people want to play at the professional level is just that energy. Going to the stadium, hearing the fans, everybody getting excited when a big play happens. Like it just brings, a lot of joy into that stadium or arena or wherever, which is a very Stoic concept. We live to to be happy and to produce joy, a deep joy that that sports, in some moments can really give you. And you can't have that. I think COVID really showed, was a great example of what happens when you take the audience out of the sport. It's a completely different atmosphere. And what's funny is that I think the record for home teams didn't win as much as they normally do during the COVID period. And I think a lot of that actually has to do with the fact that just because you were playing on your field in your city, you didn't have that energy, that environment. You didn't have the whole piece. So yeah, I think definitely when you're talking about sports and how important the fan is, and how important it is for them to act responsibly and appropriately and virtuously, because there are certainly times when people don't, and those when you have a possibility for joy, it also brings the possibility for the opposite. And William, to your point too, I want to kind of bring in the fan on an individual level, because a Stoic might say it doesn't matter, we root for the team who wins, right? But there's another part where when you are attached to a team, and this is I was just reading your article earlier before this, and when you are attached to your team, and the Chicago Cubs is a great example because they're known for losing, especially before 2016 when they won the World Series. They're known for losing, and when you're attached to their team, you get to practice stoicism by suffering, by losing, by being attached to a team that has lost. And how do you respond to that? How do you act? How do you feel? Obviously, that impulse first is going to be disappointment or despair, right? It's those impulses that the Stoics say, those are the very first emotions that we feel, that we can't control those, right? We feel them, but how do we act upon them, right? If we're throwing garbage onto the field because our team lost, right? That's not virtuous. But we can train to become more virtuous through the suffering or through the joy of winning. How do we act when we win? What kind of fan are we when things go well? So I think that there is an importance in sports to being attached to a team, for wanting them to win, whether they win or not, because it's a training ground as a fan. We talk all the time about an athlete and how athletics is a training ground for the athlete to practice being virtuous, but it's also for the fan, and to deal with those emotions that they might deal with outside of sports too.
Yeah, that's good, Nick. Yeah. So within the class of indifference, right, the Stoics distinguish preferred from dispreferred. So you can be virtuous whether you're healthy or sick, but as long as it doesn't compromise your wisdom and temperance and courage and your other virtues to strive to be healthy, then you prefer health, right? There might be some circumstances in which you would prefer illness, but ordinarily you prefer health. It's a nice suggestion to think of your own sports team as its success. Let's call it its success rather than its winning. Its success as a preferred indifferent. I prefer it when my Cubs play well.
Mm-hmm.
If they play well and lose to a better team that played better that day, then the Stoic fan is going to celebrate the superior baseball excellence of the Cardinals, who once again defeated my Chicago Cubs, right? But sometimes the Cubs come from behind and they play better and they defeat the Cardinals. And so I can celebrate the excellence of coming from behind to win, as you said, endurance, right? When you've lost a series of games, but then you're trying to turn your season around. But notice that those are virtues of the game played out during the game, in contrast to the outcome, the final score. the Stoics would say you should be emotionally detached from. What you should root for is a good game. And if you see an excellent play on the field, you celebrate that, whether it's your team or your opponents, right? And you can cheer more, I suppose, when your team is doing better, and cheer maybe a little less when the other team is doing better. As long as when the game is over, you go home and don't stew over the mistakes that your team made and you mope about your team having lost, right? Is that a distinction we can make, right? Similarly with the players. You're fulfilling your role as a player by leaving it all out there, as we say, on the field, playing the best you can, being the best teammate you can, honing your skills, on the field, trying to be a good teammate, a good baseball player, whatever. But when that game is over, you leave that equipment behind and you resume another one of your roles as a sister or a mother or a daughter or whatever, right? Or as a coworker, because Epictetus talks about all these different roles. Whatever role that you have, you should try to perform it well. That's up to you. That's your duty, right? But what happens between the lines on the field, once the game is over, it doesn't matter. What matters is the virtues that you carry through all of the different spheres of your activities, whether you're playing a game of chess or a game of baseball or soccer, or whether you're parenting, right? Caring for a child, or you're transporting people in a bus because that's your job, right? So that's where virtue is going to manifest itself. And yeah, I mean, as a fan, you're a member of a community, absolutely, right? So it's a community activity, and you feel that solidarity and that shared interest, rooting for the preferred and different of your team doing well. But what measures success, though? It's not the final score on my interpretation of Stoic philosophy of sport, right? It's how well the game is played.
Yeah.
Because there are things that, I mean, you can kick a field goal and it can be, going right through the uprights, and then there can be a huge gust of wind in Buffalo that blows it just to the side, and you miss the field goal, and it's on
wide right.
Right? And from the Stoic perspective, if you're the kicker, how should you feel?
Yeah.
If you did everything that was up to you that you could to prepare to kick well during the game, and you did the best you could, that's what's up to you. If you miss the field goal because of a gust of wind, that doesn't make you a bad kicker. That just means that Zeus, God, nature, providence had another idea about the outcome of that kick. It's not up to your opponents. It's not up to you and your coach and your teammates. The wind, the weather conditions, this is up to nature. It's not up to you.
Yeah. And that's as a coach, that's something that I tell my kids. I've got a U9 boys team and a U10 girls team, so they're young. But what I tell them before every game and what we worked on this season is, look, we don't go out there. Our focus isn't to win. Like we're out there to compete, yes, but we're not focused on the score. What we're focused on is playing the best soccer we can, and that's the phrase that I use with them is. We are focused on doing the best we can. And I broke it down to an individual level with them, because when we do warm-ups, we do sprints, and because they're 9 and 10 years old, I make it into a race, right? So they sprint all the way to me and they high-five me and then they go back. And at the start, I noticed that every time they would sprint, they would look over to the other person to see if they were beating them, right? Now, and I could tell their heads were, am I going to win, right? They were attached to the winning. So I pulled them all in and I said, don't look across to the other person, because whether or not you can run faster than them, it doesn't matter, right? You can run as fast as you can and they could still be faster than you. Look straight ahead and focus on running as fast as you can. And that's as a team then playing the best soccer we can. But yeah, to your point, right? It's not about winning, but I do really believe that if you do focus on playing the best soccer you can, you're gonna probably win more games. You're probably gonna have that external success, if you're focused on those internals.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. I mean, what I like to say is the person you're really competing against is not your opponent, but who you were last week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you can run a little faster than you could last week, then that's progress. That's the kind of Olympic Games, Olympic athlete training and serious dedication that Epictetus talks about is necessary for making progress in philosophy as a Stoic, right? You have to have the dedication of an Olympic athlete. Not, you know, I'm sorry, but not an NFL, you know, football player or a baseball player. These Olympic athletes, holy cow, right? They're at peak physical shape and they compete once every 4 years. So you're talking about practice, right? I remember the famous Allen Iverson. Practice? You're asking me about practice? Practice matters. Practice is everything, right? The team that practices better is going to improve. And yes, it seems natural to measure improvement and progress in terms of the final score, but that's very dangerous because, you know, referees can make bad calls. And, you know, some teams recruit better than others and they have bigger athletes. So like you're saying, yeah, you want your players to improve as players, improving their skills. And it's very seductive to think, well, how well are we doing? Well, what's our record? How many wins and losses do we have? This is very dangerous in terms of measuring Stoic progress because as a good person, we don't have wins and losses that are quantified numerically on a scoreboard, right? We have opportunities to not get angry. That's a loss from the point of view of Stoic ethics. When you lose your temper, that's a loss, right? So there are more slippery ways of, it's more difficult to measure your progress, you know, in life as a Stoic, as a virtuous person, a Stoic practitioner, because you don't have that scoreboard showing runs, hits, errors, RBIs, right? And all the data that are generated in sports these days, all these different metrics. You don't have that when it comes to living a good life, unless you fall prey to the mistake of measuring your success as a person in terms of what? Wealth and fame.
I wonder if I can.
Look how many hits the walled garden is getting. Oh, look how many people have subscribed. That means that Simon is succeeding, right? That means he's doing a good job. He's providing useful content, right?
I wouldn't rush to any of those conclusions, but go on.
But this is the danger in capitalism, right? I don't want to get too political here in terms of economic theory, but right? I mean, how is the value of your work measured? Well, it's how much you're paid, how much money you make. Yeah, wealth, a preferred indifferent, but still an indifferent. So one more thought I'll throw out there is approaching things from again, Stoicism to sports. So one of the things that Stoics emphasize is meditation on death. This is something we should do every day, right? Meditation on death. Look at things from above, the big picture, the global outlook. Recognize that terrible storms in California, mudslides, all of that, hurricanes on the eastern seaboard and the southeast, and tornadoes in the Midwest, and here in Arizona, the weather's beautiful most of the time. But anyway, right? So from the big picture, you know, death is part of the equation of living in the world that we have and being alive. You can't be alive unless your mortality is guaranteed. Only mortals die, right? So Stoics remind themselves of death every day because it puts things in perspective. Then it's not as easy to sweat the small stuff, right? Focus on what's up to you, being a good person, fulfilling your roles to other people, being a member of the community, being a good teammate, right? A good participant in the larger whole. Focus on that stuff. But remember, your days are short. Your days are numbered. You're not going to live forever. So this helps impart a kind of urgency in your pursuit of virtue, right? Don't postpone, don't procrastinate, because you don't know how long you have. And advancing in virtue takes a lot of effort and dedication. So how does that apply to sports? Well, it seems to me it means thinking a lot about losing. Remember losing. Not as a foregone conclusion, not so that you're going to strive to lose, but remember that losing is ineliminable from competing. And you can't lose at the practice because there's no scoreboard, but you can lose, the respect of your coach if you're not trying hard, right? That's a kind of losing as an athlete. If you're not making the progress, you're not putting in the work, right? So recognizing that losses are going to happen, but, right, as you were talking about endurance, Nick, and resilience, learn from the loss. What could you have done better? And if you played the best you could and the other team wins, that's the way the sport's supposed to work. The people who play the best, the team that plays the best as a team, ought to win most of the time. And you should celebrate that, no matter which, what jersey you're wearing, no matter which team you're on, and as a fan, and as a coach, right? I mean, the coach, as you say so nicely in your dissertation, Nick, I mean, you want to develop your players as human beings. They're kids. You want them to, internalize these virtues for life, because they might not become professional athletes on the football field, that is the soccer field, right? Or the other way around. The rest of the world calls it football, right? Only we Americans call it soccer.
Yeah.
Why do we call it soccer?
Oh, we got the Irish on our side too, but yeah, no. And to go off of that, I just want to give an example of, the way sport is supposed to work, because you do see it. You do see some beautiful moments, but recently, Alex Ovechkin, a hockey player, one of the best hockey players ever, he scored his 802nd career NHL goal, which is the second most goals ever scored. And the other team, the team that he was competing against that night, after the game, after this team had just lost, and after Alex Ovechkin had just gotten this record, they stayed on the ice and they shook his hand afterwards as a sign of respect. And that's a really good example of what you're just talking about, William, about, we play to compete, we play, we want to play the best that we can, but sometimes, and I think in sports especially, it's a grudging respect most of the time when you recognize that the other team, the other players are just better than you. It's definitely a respect, and sometimes it's a little bit begrudging, but when Alex Ovechkin scored that 802nd goal, it was just pure respect and a joy for this man who has accomplished such a feat by being so good.
That's a great example of career achievement. I'll throw another one out that's not from team player, a team sport, but men's singles tennis. Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal. Mm-hmm. They played together. They were in tears. These guys had battled on clay and hard court and grass at Wimbledon for decades. Roger Federer's career, and Nadal, his knees, his feet, the way he just chewed up his body playing on the clay for so long. Just fantastic players that are so moved by each other, coming to the ends of their careers, and the depth of respect. I mean, yeah, this is a very academic reference, but one reason to think that Stoicism was such a powerful ancient philosophy is because they had the toughest intellectual opponents in the history of ancient Greek and Roman philosophy, and they were the skeptics. And the skeptics attacked the Stoic arguments and the Stoic theory and system, and it forced the Stoics to do philosophy better. And it's like Nadal and Federer duking it out. And then you got Djokovic too, right? These guys had the careers, they had the success that they did because they had world-class opponents that they had to get a little bit better than in that tournament, right?
Mm.
And this is really like, this is the beauty of sports. When we see our opponents as challenging us to be better people, right? Not losing our anger, shaking hands after the match, applauding the ace. This is why tennis players who are classy, when they hit the ball and it clips the net and dribbles over, or if the opponent's up at the net and you're going for the passing shot and you hit it so hard and it just hits the top of the net and it bloops, flies just over what would have been your opponent's winning volley, you raise your racket and apologize, right? Because it's luck. Luck shouldn't determine who wins the point. Or if it's game point, the game. Or what if it's set point? Holy cow. And you win on a net court. It shouldn't be about luck. It should be about skill. And what you respect is the skill and the fortitude and endurance of your opponents.
Mm.
And if you show that, then you're winning. That's what winning is. Lose the match, but have a better month. Struggle for the month, but have a better year, right? That's the Stoic perspective.
I want to build on that if possible, William, because Nick was just talking about just this pinnacle moment in that footballer's career. I've forgotten his name. What was his name again, Nick?
The hockey player, Alex
sorry,
Ovechkin.
that's right. Yeah,
Ovechkin. Yeah.
Ovechkin.
This pinnacle moment, and you're talking about the importance of opposition. This great concept that that there would not be I without other. There's the opponent, and then there's and it's that force that allows us to wrestle in life. And throughout our conversations, Nick, we've discussed this idea. I kind of want to paint a picture for you guys and get you to comment on it, because I think one of the most profound conversations that we had, Nick, was when we kind of built that hierarchy of all those levels in say a football game, all the way up, almost building like a ladder to God sort of situation. Because if you really think about it, it's like, okay, firstly, you've got these people who have to, I'm going to leave a whole bunch of roles and people out of this, but let's say you have to have a really great stadium, right? And you got to have a beautiful lawn, and everything's got to be just right. That you don't want to go to a crappy stadium, So let's hope that the builders have done an excellent job of building this stadium. And we all know when you walk into a great stadium, just oh my gosh, the atmosphere, everything is just amazing. It's incredible. Then you've got the whole management team of the sports team, right? So you've got the managers, you've got the coaches, you've got the people who are picking the players, all this stuff. Each of them has a role to play here, and if they do it just right, then their team is perhaps going to have a better chance of working together well and perhaps winning more games. You've got the players, and every single player has a very specific role that they play in the game. And if they do that role well, then everybody can kind of lock in. And we discussed this idea that there's almost like you see birds meandering in a flock, right? And it's like, that's not a whole bunch of birds. That's like one flock of birds. It's one thing, and it's all moving simultaneously, and then they go over here and then they go over there. And that can happen as a sports team. And then you think, okay, well, we actually need somebody to play against. And so, it's necessary to have that other team there. And if they are doing the best that they can do, then we have an excellent opponent to wrestle with, right? And that forces us to play to the best that we can play. And there's this thing that happens. And perhaps this is the moment when we also speak about the audience, like we were talking about before. Even the audience has like a role to play, right? But we discuss this moment, and the moment is, we as human beings, we're always striving for perfection. We're striving to be the very best that we can be. And it seems to me like such a good picture of virtue is that moment when, let's say you have an incredible opponent team. So the competition is really, really difficult. And then you've got an incredible home team, for example, and they are just playing at the top of their game. Everybody is doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing when they're supposed to be doing it. They're locked in. Nobody's going outside of their bounds. They know that they are a part of a team. They have a whole to contribute to. And because the competition is so good, but nonetheless, they managed to score a goal, right? And you see what happens in that moment. And I think this is really telling of perhaps what virtue is, this idea of all parts contributing to the whole perfectly, right? Because when you see an incredible goal scored, just watch what happens in the crowd. It's like this automatic, nobody chooses to do this. It just happens. Everybody leaps to their feet. Everybody goes nuts. It's this ecstatic atmosphere. It's this celebration of, oh my gosh, that was one of the most incredible things I've ever seen. Perfection. He could have. There was a million ways that he could have gone wrong there, but it happened, right? And we got to witness this. And I just think that is such a it's a universally applicable analogy for our lives, even with our bodies. It's like you feed it the right nutrition, you drink lots of water, you maybe exercise, like all of these things that you can do to contribute to your body. And then your body has all of these organs that are all doing some specific thing in their own lane, but nonetheless, they're contributing to the whole. And what happens as an individual when you're playing in a sports team and you've really taken care of your body and you've really trained and everything, your body is at peak condition. You can actually have those moments where all the parts come together to serve the whole. And I don't know, maybe Nick, you could speak to that a little bit more, because I just so enjoyed those conversations with you. And I do think that is you can take that analogy into businesses or into your relationship, into all these different places. So this is what we want. We want all parts switched on so that we can have more of those moments where, wow, look at this coming together. All of these parts are contributing meaningfully to the whole of life. So I don't know, Nick or William, if you had any comment on that kind of analogy. Hi friends, we'll be right back with this episode, but for now, I wanted to tell you about one of the services that we are proud to offer in the Walled Garden Philosophical Society, and that is philosophical mentoring. This is a method of coaching that aims to bring the mentee's actions into alignment with their most noble aspirations. And as mentors, we do this by holding space for philosophical dialogue and mutual discernment of the paths that lead to a flourishing life. At the Walled Garden, we have a whole team of truly world-class philosophers who are here and ready to walk with you as you face life's many challenges and opportunities. And we just love to meet you and see how we can help. If you'd like to book an initial consultation, just go to thewalledgarden.com/mentoring. Again, that's thewalledgarden.com/mentoring. We look forward to working with you, but for now, enjoy the rest of this episode.
Yeah, I think, for me, one of the reasons that I was drawn to soccer of all the sports, because I grew up watching and playing and loving pretty much every sport, but how fluid soccer was and how, how oftentimes that picture doesn't come together. And so when it does come together, it's even more ecstatic. There's more joy. If you watch a basketball game, somebody scores a basket, yeah, it's great, but it happens, 100 times a game. So I think one of the things that I think about soccer, and I had this idea actually just a couple weeks ago, is I was thinking about art. And, if you talk about movies or books, right, and you're looking at the finished product of the movie, right, and that's if it's done well, it's a good piece of art. But you don't think about the creation of art. You don't think about everything that has to go into it, all of the pieces that go into that creation. And the beautiful thing about sports, and especially for me, at least soccer, is that game itself is the creation of art. It is, most of the time, it's a lot of hard work. It doesn't go that well. And so when those moments happen, when that art does come to fruition, when virtue is achieved on the field, it's beautiful. I mean, it's just, that's why there is such a deep joy when that happens. That's why people leap to their feet, they go nuts. It's because for most of the time, the parts are trying to work towards that whole, and they don't always succeed, especially against good competition. But yeah, sorry, I think you're muted, Simon.
Sorry, I was just going to say, Nick, don't you think that the fact that the response that you have to one of those moments is so just intrinsic, built into us, just automated, like, oh my, I don't watch a lot of sports. I'm not a sports guy. I think about all of this in the same way, but with playing in a band, as a musician. But nonetheless, when I'm watching, one of the rare sports games that I do watch, and I see something incredible happen on the field, I can't help but get it's just my whole body turns on, it's, wow. Yeah. Did you see, it's such an automated, and I think that in a sense that shows us so much about what we are looking for as human beings. We're looking for those moments when all of the pieces come together in spite of incredible difficulty, incredible opposition, but nonetheless, we managed to wrestle our way through, and something transcendent happened there. And I do think that it is transcendent in a way.
Yeah, I mean, it gives you a little bit of hope for humanity, that that's our innate response to something so beautiful, is that we cheer for it, we want it to happen. And so I do think it definitely shows that we want virtue to happen. We want this art, we want this beauty. We often get sidetracked by other things that we think are art or more virtuous, and we kind of go off course. But yeah, I think that is a good example of just that innate human nature to want the virtue, to want to live a good life, a joyous life. William, I'll let you hop in too.
And after your comment, William, I'll just mention, I think we're going to open it up to a bit of a Q&A.
That'd be great. The one point I would want to add is, Simon, you were talking about, when the stadium is grand and huge and well made, and that reminded me of the controversy in Qatar, right, about the workers who were treated so horribly and pressed. So why mention that?
Well, I would say that's going to be part of it as well. If you really think about it, like, if you're sitting in that stadium and that happened, it's going to detract a little bit from your experience there. Like, you'd much rather know that the whole line right from the bottom up to the top is that there's good, well-meaning players, all this sort of stuff, nobody's being. Nonetheless, the human condition is that we always have to, there is always ink in the milk. Maybe that's in terms of,
Well, yes, right. And Judy makes a good point about the Roman slaves, building the Colosseums, and it similarly. It is sobering, and it's important. Yeah, it is sobering, and you have to recognize that it does come at a kind of human cost. So there's a trade-off, isn't there? There's the human cost, but then there's this transcendent experience that occasionally happens. But the only thing, the point I wanted to make was just, let's not forget that sports takes place, game playing takes place in the most humble of venues all over the world all the time. When 5 and 6 year olds are kicking the soccer ball around in an alley, when they're playing stickball in the street, they don't do that in Brooklyn anymore, but they used to. But there are places where children are learning these skills. So let's not think that, well, we can only appreciate this, once we're old. We can only appreciate this as fans watching young athletes in their prime who are professionals making millions and millions of dollars that devote their entire lives. No. Let's celebrate and remember the small joys of playing as children ourselves, right? Where there aren't fans, there's no audience, there are no spectators, but there can also be that artistic beauty and joy in playing a great wiffle ball game, right? Or a great little, 3-on-3 basketball game, or whatever it is, kicking, setting up, a little mini soccer field in an alley somewhere, and just having 4-on-4 or 2-on-2, whatever it is. That's where the appreciation, the joy of game playing, play is a kind of freedom, right? It frees us. There are rules that establish what the game is, but as children, we can establish and change those rules however we want within the game, since the expression of it is this freedom to celebrate a game and playing in the game as an athlete of that age with that skill level, right? That's why I just don't want that small kind of game playing to be lost and overshadowed by the multi-million, billion-dollar, professional sports that's televised. This stuff is going on the small stage, on small stages all over the place, and that's to be celebrated too.
Yeah, William, just to that point, I think one of my favorite memories of this past fall when I was coaching, my young ones, is just when we finally put it together. And it was our last game of the season with my U9 boys, and the way they played, and we ended up tying the game. We didn't even win, but just I got to see them play, and they learned, and I could tell that they were learning and taking in what I was saying, and that it really impacted them from the last game to the first. And I felt that joy. I don't know how many other people recognized or realized it, but I felt that joy because I knew what had gone in, and just from a U9 boys game with 50 people, all of them being parents or siblings there was that joy achieved from that.
Hard work, right? Over the whole season, right? Weeks and weeks of work to get to that point, right? Mm-hmm. That very important Stoic lesson. We're running marathons, not sprints. This is the long haul. Yeah.
I don't know, guys. I don't buy it. I'm going to sit in my elitism over here and come on, give me a stadium. Come on, give me a stadium, and it better be multi-million dollars. And I won't say, yeah. Anyway, Judith, I'll bring you in here. Anyway, thank you so much. Yeah. William and Nick, this has been so much fun, and I really appreciate you guys spending the time and joining in this conversation today. Brilliant stuff. So I'll hand it over to you, Judith.
Oh, thank you, William and Nick. It's been great. Look, I've got a couple of points, I suppose. One is that so many of the institutions of our sporting tradition, the stadia, the teams, the competition, athletics, we inherit them directly from the Greeks and Romans. So it's no accident that these connections are being made. And it wasn't just, of course, the Stoics who traded on those important cultural traditions. So, for instance, St. Paul, when he's appealing to Greek audiences, knows to use an athletic metaphor or two. So these were very powerful cultural traditions, not just for the Stoics. But the second point I'd make too is that, and I think I talked about this on Brandon's Strong Stoic podcast, as parents, and the parents of the kids you coach, Nick, would be in this position, we don't send our kids to learn sports so that they're going to become professionals, because that's the privilege only of a tiny minority of kids learning sport. What we send them to you, Nick, we send them to learn sports so that they can, because it's a proxy for learning the virtues of self-control, courage, justice, and wisdom. Self-control. You have to be self-controlled to do well in a sport. You have to practice, and you have to not come out with everything that comes into your head. You have to have a routine. You have to be dedicated. Courage-wise, you have to attempt things that you haven't attempted before. Wisdom, you have to, again, comes back to you have to know when it's time for you to do your thing or not. And justice is part of playing fairly, and doing the right thing by both your team and the other team. Those virtues are what our children learn, and that's why why we send kids to learn sport, because sport is a proxy for true virtue training for the vast majority of kids in the West, and particularly because we don't live in a virtue culture, right? The Greeks and Romans did. They also had training specifically in virtue. In our cultures, we don't. We have, in some senses, an anti-virtue culture. We have a culture of narcissism. Social media and reality TV are presenting kids with very different values, I'll say. But sport is one of the areas where we can encourage them to develop these important qualities for their lives.
Yeah, well, Judy, I would love it if you were one of my kids' parents, for sure. That's exactly why, I coach them. But the unfortunate thing is that is exactly why they should be there, and that is why their parents should put them there. And I think for a lot of people that is true. But I think one of the hard things about being a coach, one of the struggles that not that I have this, but I know other coaches have this, and it's pretty common, is that parents will get mad or will have concerns just because your U9 boys team isn't winning. They place that value on the winning, or they think that is where the virtue is. And so if their virtue is misguided as the parents, it places some pressure or some obstacle in the way of the coach to teach the virtue that they want to teach the Stoic virtue. And I think that's definitely
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Judy. Thank you, Nick. Yeah, that's why I would say, Judy, the one tweak I would make to what you said is that games, sports can be a proxy for virtue training. It ought to be, it can be, but if you don't have a thoughtful, virtue-focused, Stoic, sympathetic coach like Mr. Davis coaching your 7, 8, 9-year-olds, then what you're going to get is, well, your son or daughter isn't good enough to play much in the game, and I'm trying to win. And they've got to learn that, their role is to be a bench warmer 95% of the time, because I got to win, because that's what the other parents, that's what the administration and my bosses want me to do, is win, 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 win. And with winning comes, fame, and with fame comes wealth. And again, that's not the goal for a virtuous person, for a Stoic. And so, and self-control. But what you say about the virtue is very key. Self-control and not losing your temper, right? We see anger erupting among fans, in the stands, among players, bumping referees. I watched a few minutes of an NFL game by accident the other day, and there was a player who fell down. He was on the field grabbing his knee, and there were other players around him. And one of the trainers came out to look at the guy, and an opposing player of the injured one was standing near him. And so the trainer had to kind of brush past him, to get to look at the player. What did the opposing player do? He shoved the trainer. And then there was the flag, and then the refs consulted, and then he got expelled. And then he's crying. It's like, what are you thinking? Right? Self-control, not getting angry. So I think it is a very big challenge to cheer and be elated and be hungry for that transcendence, right? The glass being half full when good things happen in the sport, but not to get negative and angry and lose or resentful when things don't go, or if you're surprised by something. That's the real challenge. But that's the challenge of parenting kids too, right? It's not okay to get angry. You stand up for yourself. You don't allow people to be bullied. You call it out, but not losing your anger. Boy, that's huge for Stoics, whether in sports or any other context. But wonderful comments. Thank you, Judy.
So we've got Jen here. I just have to comment though, William. I've never heard the term Stoic sympathetic. That's the term that we should call ourselves if we don't want to call ourselves Stoic quite yet, or Stoic adjacent, or
Yeah.
Yes.
Scott Aiken told me once he's Stoish, but I like Stoic sympathetic.
That's the term that we use in our Epictetus commentary that's in production now. Yeah. He's Stoish. Yeah. I didn't want to presume, Nick, to hang that label on you.
No,
as a Cub fan, I have to be a Stoic. Being Stoic isn't good enough.
Yeah, exactly.
I've got to try to be Stoic. I fail miserably, which is why I'm a fool. But I Stoic isn't enough for me.
It's better to be a fool. Here we go, Jen. Do you want to jump in?
Sure. I mean, I'm commenting. I'm coming at this from a not super sporty person myself, but I'm seeing it's you have an individual like a child who's going to play soccer on Nick's team. So this kid is coming in and then you're teaching him or her more of the virtues, and they're building their character. And as they're doing this, they're learning about, they're maybe bringing in the circles of concern, like you're part of this team now, and treat everybody as we're all one because we're all part of nature, the cosmos, the cosmic soup, as Simon dubbed it the other day on our Soul Searching with Seneca meeting. So it's like you changing the perspective of these kids who may have grown up maybe more like individualistic, especially in the Western society, to, be more accepting of loss, to cheer on the other team and just see everything as a whole. Because as you're building your character, you're helping the rest of the team build theirs as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I think it, when you watch these after the game, when the game ends, when you watch these professional baseball and football players and hockey players, as Nick mentioned before, watch what they do after the game. Watch what they do with opposing players whose team they left, right? And this happens with kids too. The ones who do go to, in high school, college, they're going to play with and against the same people. And so when you recognize that, that they're all trying to get better at their skill, to be better players, to achieve success. And friendships, right? Strong friendships. That's the fertile soil of friendship, is when you have that shared activity, that shared experience, competing with teammates and opponents. Yeah, it can be very fruitful for building friendships and character growth. But and then the challenge is the rivalries can get ugly. Right? Not everyone ends up like Rafa and Roger after tennis careers of spanning decades, right? There are rivals who really dislike each other. And of course it's the result of disrespect. Right? So that's what's so
Nick Curios.
Challenging. What's that, Nick?
I just said Nick Curios. Just throwing that name out.
That's who I was thinking of too, right? Yeah, I mean, they're tennis players who really dislike each other. And again, with the singles, they're in the same locker room. Who was it? Oh gosh, which tournament was it in 2022 in the finals where the two guys were close friends playing each other in the finals? Oh, that's happened a couple times. It happened with Andy Roddick and Marty Fish. They lived together in Roddick's home. They grew, they spent. But I forget who it was some months back. But guys were two close friends facing each other in like a semifinal or a final match. Wow, right? They're going to be friends. If they're real friends, they're going to be friends after the match is over. So if you think of your opponents on the field as potential friends, not just anonymous opponents to respect in some sort of distant way, but people that you can befriend, that you can count on, right? Wow. I mean, like who was the football player on the Bills? Nick, Damian.
Oh, yes. Damien.
Whoever it was.
Yeah.
The guy who tackled
hard.
someone and he got a helmet to the chest and his heart stopped. He stood up after the tackle and then he collapsed. This was the Bengals Bills game a week ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
DeMar
Hamlin.
I mean, the opponent. Oh my gosh, this is life and death. Yeah. And again, life and death. What? You mean somebody might die on a football field? Yes. Stoic. The Stoic message, right? Keep it in perspective, right? We're mortal. Death can happen at any time. If that doesn't make you urgent, if that doesn't lend you urgency in pursuing what matters in life and letting the trivial stuff, the small stuff go, right? This is why, yeah. So, death.
Can I throw
death and transcendence? Death and transcendence, Simon.
Well, I want to throw an olive branch out to anybody who borderlines psychopathy in their competitiveness, because really, I do think that there is a place for living on that threshold of competitiveness where you get to that kind of peak just before it becomes diminishing returns, just before it starts to go over into unhealthy behaviors. Because I mean, sports, like, you can back me up on this, Nick. Like, how much of sports is psychological? When you're on that field, if you're up against a team, like, let's take the All Blacks from New Zealand, for example. How do they start every single game? They get up there, like they're doing this, oh my gosh, this horrifying like display of power and of, we are here to absolutely crush you, the haka, right? Mm-hmm. Like, think about the psychological effect that's going to have on the other team, right? And I really think that there is a place for saying, okay, when I get on this field, these people are not necessarily my friends. Maybe when I'm off the field, but
potential
now,
friends.
Potential friends. Okay, no, potential friends. Fair enough. But still,
after the game,
I'm not going to stand there and applaud when they win a point. I'm just not going to. No. You know what I mean? Like there's a place for being just, I don't know, like psychologically terrifying on that field, because it's part of the competition, that, you know, the wrestling. And I don't know, maybe you could speak to that, Nick. Maybe I'm going a bit too far.
No, I love it. And the All Blacks is great to throw in, because actually the college that I coach at, we have a book that's kind of like our team Bible. It's called Legacy, and it's about the All Blacks. And they talk about the haka and the importance of it, and not just psychologically against the other team, but psychologically for themselves. You know, this is an indigenous tribal dance that I believe, and I might be wrong, but I believe they do it, you know, before they would go to war. And so it creates the psychology of the players and what they're doing. But the great thing, the really cool thing about the haka is that it is steeped in tradition. And so you take it back to the cosmic soup, and these players are doing this dance that gives them that perspective of, it's not about me. It's not about this, you know, just right now. I am upholding a tradition. I have to act virtuously, because, you know, the jersey that I put on is more than just a jersey. You know, there's tradition, there's, you know, a people, a tribe to represent. And so I think psychologically, you know, the haka is a fantastic example of just, you know, giving that perspective of sports that is so much more than just the sport itself. It's a lot less trivial than that when you really get into it.
Yeah.
The preparation has to be mental. The preparation has to be mental and physical.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's the mental part. That's the spiritual part of getting pumped up. They've got to be mentally prepared and not just physically trained. Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking, if I ever run for politics, guys, you can take that clip of me doing the haka. That'll immediately get me canceled. You know, they'll be like, this guy doesn't get it. He's trying to be disrespectful. You know,
especially you being Australian, talking about the New Zealand rugby
team. 3 of those things recorded that I think could get me damage in the future, but we'll see. Does anybody else have any questions, comments, pushback, agreements, whatever? Like I say, questions, comments, condemnations. Anybody? Well, look.
Condemnations. Wow, that's strong.
I don't know. But look, guys, this has been so much fun. I really appreciate you being here today, and I appreciate everybody for showing up as well. In the same way, we all play a role here in growing this beautiful community and having these kinds of conversations. And I'm so honored to have been able to have this conversation with you guys today. I think it's going to really be so beneficial for so many people. So thank you. Any final comments from either William or Nick, if you guys have anything that you wanted to share before we duck off, before we leave the field, so to speak.
Before we leave the field.
No, I just want to thank all of you, Simon, Nick, Judy, Jen, Chuck, and
Alex. iPhone.
Sorry, Mr. iPhone. What's his name?
Alex.
Alex. Thank you, Alex, for coming. Yeah, this is fun. Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, thank you. Obviously, thank you, Simon, for everything you do with the Walled Garden. Just providing this opportunity for us to have these conversations is awesome. So thank you, and yeah, thanks for everybody for coming. We had a couple others on here that those were my parents. So yeah, they came for a little bit, but
I'm sure they're so proud.
I appreciate non-familial encouragement. So thank you for coming.
Well, thanks, Nick. Yeah, and thanks, William, and yeah, thanks, Judy. Thanks, Jen, Alex, and Chuck. This was great. So we'll see you guys next time. Plenty more events coming in the Walled Garden, and I would love to see you there. So for now, we'll all leave the field, and we'll catch you back here next time. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Walled Garden podcast. This show is the central podcast of the Walled Garden Philosophical Society. To find out more about our events, services, and community, just go to thewalledgarden.com. Until next time, we wish you well as you nourish the gardens of your mind.